Hello and welcome to this network education video. My name is Russell DeLong and this is Evolved Mobility Management. As you'll see in this video, a user's state, whether they are active, whether they are connected, whether they have a session, can be pretty ambiguous terms when it comes to the Evolved Packet System. So this video is really an attempt to clarify some of the more important theory behind mobility management and how it is distinct from, yet still related to, session management. So this video seeks to cover an overview of location, network, and user identifiers used for mobility management, a breakdown of Emm states that a subscriber can be in, and what the implications of each of those states are for the user, as well as an overview of common Emm call flows. So mobility management itself deals with keeping track of where registered users are, the simplest way I can put it. A user's location identifiers are hierarchical, as we'll see, where the user's location is known with different levels of precision depending on what state the user's device is in and what radio technology they are using. Mobility management itself is the responsibility of the mobility management entity, which shouldn't come as a big surprise based on its name, for the Evolved Packet System, and for previous architectures it was the responsibility of the MCDLR for traditional circuit switch core networks, and the SGSN, or Serving GPRS Support Node, for legacy GPRS core or PS4. While terminology may vary between these three architectures, mobility management concepts themselves are extremely similar across the board. And if you have previous experience with either of those architectures and are already strong in their mobility management theory concepts, you will find you are very much at home in the theory being discussed here, although much of the terminology has changed. So evolved mobility management states when the user is registered with the MME, that's kind of at a top level here. The user can be Emm registered with the MME, or he can be deregistered or not registered with the MME. When the user is registered, he can have one of two ECM or Evolved Connection Management states. Either he's connected to the MME right now or he is idle. When the user is in an ECM connected state, it can be said that he has an RRC connection between the UE and the E-node-D, the cell tower, and that he has a UE context or an S1AP UE context between the E-node-D and the MME over the S1 MME interface. So ECM is kind of a sub-state of EMM, and then ECM connected would imply the existence of an RRC connection and an S1AP UE context connection. Emm messages, so that is all messages between the UE and the MME for the purposes of mobility management, are confined within NAS or non-access strata messages. If you recall from previous videos, all messages, in fact, for signaling between the UE and the MME are enclosed within NAS or non-access strata messages carried across by the E-node-D. All NAS messages can be broken down into EMM-related messages, those concerned with these connections, and ESM messages, Evolved Session Management, those messages which concern themselves with the connection between the UE and external IP networks. So establishing another EPS bearer would be done over ESM exchanges. Registering with or sending a keep alive to maintain your mobility state with an MME would be concerned with EMM related NAS messages. That's kind of the divide. Although both ESM and the MM messages are both sent between the UE and the MME over NAS or non-access strata. Simple enough? So ESM, I just want to show this very quickly here. This is not the focus of this video. I just wanted to quickly demonstrate the number of stateful connections that exist between these network elements for the purposes of a user having a single EPS bearer or a single connection between the user and an external IP network. So ESM messages between the user and the MME would deal with setting up an EPS bearer, setting up or tearing down this S5 bearer, S1 bearer, and the radio bearer. These two combined would make up the ERAB, the Evolved Radio Access bearer, and of course the user-specific S11 tunnel between MME and S-Gateway also. A separate control tunnel exists as well between on S5 between S-Gateway and P-Gateway. So my point here is just to illustrate that there are a lot of user-specific stateful connections between these systems just for the purposes of having an IP connection between the UE and an external packet data network, such as the internet. And that these, in this slide, demonstrate ESM or are created or torn down or maintained with ESM messaging between the user and the enemy, whereas in contrast, Emm messages concern themselves with these stateful connections. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead here. So, mobility states in the evolved packet system. I just wanted to break down kind of the three states that the user can be in. Even though ECM is a substate of EMM, really, there's only really three possibilities if you break it down. So it's impossible to be EMM deregistered but ECM connected. So at the most connected level that the user can be in, he is EMM registered and ECM connected. So we already went over most of this, but when he's ECM connected, that means the HSS knows the current enemy the user is registered with. So for example, the user does an initial attach procedure, the enemy would send an update location request to the HSS to say I'm the serving enemy for this user. So if he's EMM registered, that's guaranteed. HSS knows the user's location up to this level. The enemy knows the user's location with cell level precision. You gotta remember, if he's ECM connected, that means that he has a radio resource control channel to a specific inode, a specific cell, and the MME has a specific connection towards the inode just for that user. So the MME can tie that user to a specific cell if he's ECM connected. I sort of mentioned these other two here already, but the MME has established a UE context with the inode, and he has an established RSC connection, UE does, towards the inode. So all of these connections exist, basically, if the UE is ECM connected. If the UE transitions into an idle state, or an ECM idle state formally, HSS still knows the user up to enemy level precision. MME knows the user's location with tracking area list level precision. We're going to talk about this in an upcoming slide. Basically, a tracking area is just a logical group of cell sites. So if the user is idle, he's not connected to a given site, the enemy still at this level knows at least what group of sites he's generally connected to or near or within. There is no inode tied to the user, as I said, and the UE has no radio bear or S1 bear. Notice here a tie-in. This is an ESM. This relates to the EPS bear. One of the three EPS bears is S1U bearer, and the other is radio bearer. So two of the three bearers or legs of an EPS bearer do not exist if the user is in an ECM idle state. This here is a relation between the two. So even though all messages can either be broken down into EMM or ESM related messages, it is also true that if the UE, you go up here, if the UE has no S1AP UE context with the MME, then the MME does not and will not have an established or will not allow to have an established radio access pair between the UE and an S gateway. This connection here, this EMM or ECM connected state, this gets established prior to a radio access pair being established. So they're two separate things, although they are still related in the sense that one requires the other. And EMM deregistered, this is the lowest level. So HSS may know the last MME that the user was registered with. The MME may know the last, may have some state information for the subscriber. We're going to talk about these identifiers in an upcoming slide. And the UE may be unpowered or out of coverage. This basically means we don't know where the user is. If he's deregistered, it means we don't necessarily know that he's in a given tracking area. The UE has no obligation to tell the network anything. It's just that the network may be keeping old state information for where the subscriber used to be, what identifier the subscriber used to have, that kind of stuff. Alright, so general mobility call flow when the user is transitioning to and from these states. So the user becomes ECM connected when he does an attach request. The simplest example, he gets EMM registered and he gets ECM connected. He has to establish a signaling connection towards the MME in order to send a lot of his NAS messaging to say, hey, I want to create this ESM service, etc. When the UE sends a periodic tracking area update, this is a keep alive. So when the user is in an idle state, The network, because it's still we're still talking about a stateful registration, the user being registered with the enemy. Even though he's idle, he still needs to send periodic keep alives to tell the network that he still exists, that the phone hasn't ended up in a blender and been completely destroyed, that kind of stuff. So the user needs to send keep alives. That keep alive is going to be dictated to the UE in a mobility management message sent by the enemy during the attach procedure. So the attach procedure, the enemy is going to say, hey, I expect an update every X number of minutes or seconds. So after that time period, the user is expected to send keep alive periodic tracking area update, and he has to establish a connection, an RRC connection and an S1 connection, in order for the user to actually send this tracking area update and perform that procedure. The user will transition to a connected state when the enemy pages the user. Now, the enemy might page the user if, let's say, some traffic comes from the external network towards, actually, I'm going to stick with the Emm part here. So if the user has some session towards let's say the internet, some traffic comes in for it with its IP address, P gateway sends to S gateway. S gateway is going to say, hey, I don't have a radio access bearer because the user, as I said, is idle. S gateway is going to ask the enemy, hey, I need to reach the subscriber. That would be a situation where the enemy would need to transition this user into an ECM connected state. In other words, he's got to send a page request to figure out where the user is, to establish this RRC channel, to establish this S1 AP UE context, in order to have him create a radio bearer, in order to complete that end-to-end IP connection, to rebuild this RAB between the UE and the S gateway, for the purposes of, for the ESM related purpose of establishing this end-to-end EPS bearer again, so the user can respond to this message that the internet's trying to send to it. In order to do that, the user has to transition to an ECM connected state. That's one example where you would change. And you can transition to the ECM connected state when the user sends a service request. The user would send a service request, let's say when, or the user equipment would send a user service request when the user, let's say, refreshes their web browser or goes to YouTube. If the user all of a sudden needs to reach this external IP network, then the UE would, rather than having to be paged by the network to reach the device is going to connect to the network and say, hey, I need to I need to become connected again so that I can start talking to this external network. Movements towards ECM idle. So the enemy releases the S1 AP UE context ID. That alone would trigger, actually here. So in signaling, when the enemy releases this context, this blue connection, that will trigger the enemy to release this orange connection, which logically would transition this red ECM connection into an idle state, so removing this stateful connection. Emm registration would still exist, but when he goes into an idle state, all three of these would be torn down. And I guess the question would be why? Why would the enemy release? Enemy would release this UE context if we're at the end of a mobility procedure where it logically just makes sense to do so. For example, periodic tracking area update. The user is just sending a keep alive to the network. He's not sending a service request. He doesn't want some ongoing connection. He's not trying to download some file from something off the internet. So after the periodic tracking area update is finished, the MME may transition the UE into an idle state by tearing down this UE context. Another example, the UE releases RRC connection on his own right, so he transitions into an idle state towards the enemy. The device might do this if he's done using the service. He's finished with his service request. He no longer needs to have this active EPS bearer, so he doesn't need an active signaling connection to the enemy in order to maintain it. He can then release this RRC connection to say, okay, we're done, I'm good. Then he goes into an idle state. Teardown of RRC, these two kind of bounce from one to the other. If you tear down RRC from UE to ENOD, ENOD will tear down the S1AP context to the enemy, same deal. And then finally, ENOD can tear down the S1AP UE context and the RRC connection. But when would the ENOD do that? Well, as I said, both of these are stateful connections in their own right. So, perfect example will be coverage. If the user turned off his device while he is RRC connected, eventually ENOD is going to time that out. If the UE is in bad radio coverage, and loses signaling for that reason, again, eventually that's going to time out, and so you're going to have this device transition to an idle state at an ECM level. EMM state. Now the user attaches to the MME, an example of transitioning from EMM deregistered to registered. That is in fact attach request or an active tracking area update would be really the only two where you're going to transition from deregistered to registered. UE detaches from the MME. Device might do that if, for example, you're moving between networks. Let's say you were roaming and registering on another operator's MME, and you find a network that you prefer to register with. UE may deregister from one in order to register to another. UE may also deregister if you disable data in the device. Let's say you transition to airplane mode on a device. Airplane mode would traditionally have the device cleanly deregister from whatever network it's connected to. MME detaches the UE. MME might detach the UE for a few reasons. This doesn't even necessarily need to be with signaling. You can have what's called an implicit detach. Let's say, for example, the UE gets caught in a blender and is physically destroyed. I do like to give that example. But if the UE is physically destroyed and can't send these periodic tracking area updates, then eventually he's going to time out. What's going to happen is the MME keeps track of what's called a paging flag to say if he hasn't sent his periodic tracking area update within a given time period, the time period expected, he's going to clear that flag and say, hey, he's not sending updates anymore. That's not going to get rid of him yet. There's actually two timers in 3GPP specs that control this. One deals with this expected update. The second is an implicit detach time. So eventually, if the user is just completely gone, you can't reach him, the device is not sending his updates anymore, the MME can deregister him due to timeout. And that would be an example of an MME doing a deregistration. Another example is if you were to deprovision a subscriber or something, and the HSS orders the deactivation. That could happen as well. But there's a bunch of different scenarios where different parts of the network could potentially take out an EPS pair and take out EMM registration state. Continue. All right. So we went over this. Here we go. So we've been talking so far about when the user's registered and when he isn't. When he's registered, and when we know about his cell, when we don't know about his cell, when we know about his tracking area or not. Well, here's how the location of a user is kind of broken down. Keep in mind, as well, as I mentioned in the previous videos, the evolved packet core was not just intended to serve the evolved radio network, the EU trans. The evolved packet core was meant to be access agnostic, or at least as access agnostic as realistically possible. And you can have traditional GPRS core networks or traditional UMTS networks reaching out to an evolved packet core. So a device's location can be known kind of at these different levels depending on what radio access technology they're using. For legacy networks, this is exactly the same for those familiar with GPRS or circuit switch core networks. Basically, it works out from top level down as the user is on Earth. Within the world, there is a country identified with a mobile country code that is a 3-digit identifier. You can even break that down into a continent code and then a country code too. The first number is a continent identifier. The second and third are the country within that continent. Within the country, there is a network. So you've got a 2 or 3-digit value for MNC. These two combined can also be referred to as the PLMN ID. The MCC plus MNC is the PLMN ID. Within that network, there is a location area, or a logical group of cell sites. Within the location area, there is a routing area, which is sort of a subset logical group of cell sites. Just a point to note, the routing area is specific to packet switch services. You will never deal with routing areas at an MSE VLR level. And within a routing area, there is a cell, a CGI, or a GSM traditional network, and an SAC, or a serving area code, identifying a specific cell within a UMTS network. So in the evolved UTRAN, that is the one that we traditionally use, the radio component of the evolved packet system, or the EPS, again you have the world. In the world you have a country. a country, mobile country code, same exact country code here. Mobile network code, same network code as what's used up here. Within a mobile network, or within this PLMN, within this MCC MNC, you have a tracking area, identified as a tracking area code, or a TAC. Again, it's a logical group of cell sites. So a location area, logical group of cell sites to a circuit switch network. Routing area is a logical group of cell sites for a legacy packet switch network. And then a tracking area is a logical group of cell sites for an evolved packet system. Then within a tracking area, you have a cell. Now, I put it as ECGI. This is actually two things. This is the cell as well as the TAC. If you have an ECGI value, if you're looking at one, you can actually derive the TAC. What happens is the first byte of an ECGI is the TAC, and the second byte is the cell ID. So you can, if you know the ECGI, some quick math is just divide it by 256 and then round down, and you'll get the TAC from the ECGI. It's just a quick tip there, I guess. Now, Evolved Mobility Management Identifiers for a user would be this here, this GUTI. Now, if you recall from the earlier attach procedure video, where we talked about an attach request containing the user's IMSI, a permanent identifier, you'll also recall that authentication and encryption namely was not set up and can't be set up in the very first message that you're sending. So in order to add a certain layer of security to limit how often a user's IMSI is broadcasted over a radio, the use of a GUTI takes place, so a globally unique temporary identifier. There's a lot of acronyms, and I realize that all of these videos are going to contain likely a lot of new acronyms for you, but a lot of these are being reused. And this is, if you follow it, quite logical. So within the world there's a country, again, the same sort of division, from the top down, mobile country code, mobile network code. But here you're going to get into some new ones. So MMEG, so within a network you have a group of one or more MMEs with an MME group ID. Within a group of MMEs, there's an MME, so MME code or MMEC identifies a specific MME in a group of MMEs. And then within that specific MME, there's a temporary identifier that was assigned by this MME for this user. The MME is TMSI, Temporary Mobile Subscriber Identifier. Just a note here, these two can often be combined, MMEC and MTIMSI, as the S. So the idea is that when the user is, let's say he's in an ECM idle state and he's moving across the radio network, he could potentially move to an area that's served by a different MME. Or there could be load balancing going on between MMEs and he could end up with a different MME. If he reaches a different MME and he sends a tracking area update to that MME and sends this STIMSI, the STIMSI, this MMEC and MTIMSI, is enough information for any MME within that group of MMEs to figure out what MME served the user, to query that MME, to get all the security information and continue the setup. So rather than have the user do a hard reactivation, give his permanent identifier, that IMSI, every time he wants to send an update to a network and just so happens to reach a different MME, it's worked out so that he can send this temporary identifier assigned by one MME, but still have enough information about the user for the second MME, the new MME, to figure out what MME he needs to talk to get all the security information for the user to pre-authenticate and to understand what IMSI maps to, or what subscriber maps to this temporary IMSI, the temporary TIMSI value. The GUMMI, GUMMEI, is a unique identifier, a static identifier really, for an MME. So it's really just, if you saw here, it's the same breakdown. MME code, MME group, MNC, MCC. The idea of these two is that you can send a GUTI from any UE and have it be unique for that UE from any other UE anywhere in the world in any LTE network. So because you're tying it down to a specific MME in a specific group in a specific country in a specific world, well, in a specific network in a specific country, at the Earth level, you can say it should always be unique, just by virtue of tying all these identifiers together. This is in sharp contrast, by the way, to previous architectures that dealt with just the normal TMSI for circuit circuit switch networks, or the P PMSI for packet switch networks, which did have some logic to them, but they did not have this complete granular breakdown of location of identification. So location update procedures, device towards mobility management entity. Tracking area update is sent to update the enemy when the user is moving across the network. If a user crosses tracking areas, he can send a tracking area update, because if you recall, when the UE is in an ECM idle state, the enemy only knows what tracking area the user is in. He's not tied to a specific cell site. So if he crosses tracking areas, the responsibility is on the UE to update the enemy and tell him what tracking area he's currently in. Periodic tracking area updates, again, just the device keep alive. Even if he doesn't cross tracking areas, he needs to send this. Location area and routing area updates, these are if the device is registered with an MSC or an SGSN. Let's see here. So location updates, this is sort of the same concept. Location updates three ways. S6A diameter between an enemy and an HSS. So again, location update between enemy and HSS when he registers with this enemy. Same basic concept applies to circuit switch and traditional packet switch core networks when the user is sending a location update towards an HLR from an MSC VLR, and a location update, or GPRS location update, between an SGSN and an HLR if he's registering with an SGSN. So I put this slide here just to really illustrate that it's the same concept of a device registering with a mobility management system, sending those location updates every X number of seconds or minutes as a keep alive, and becoming connected, sending a service request. All of these terms are the same whether you're talking about CS, PS, or EPS networks, and it's just some new terminology that's being applied to the same theory here for EPS. Tracking area lists, I did want to include this here. This is just sort of to illustrate how tracking area lists and tracking areas work a little bit differently now in the evolved packet system than they did in the traditional circuit switch or even legacy GPRS core networks. So rather than telling a device, you need to update me, the network, me, the enemy, if you cross a tracking area, you can instead say, you need to update me if you cross these 2 or these 3 tracking areas. And this gives a level of flexibility for your planning that didn't exist in GPRS or circuit switch core networks. That is, there is a trade-off here in how large you make a tracking area, or how large you make a traditional location area. The larger the location area is, the fewer location area updates you're going to have from the users, right? Because if they're moving constantly across the network, the bigger you make a single location area, the less likely they are to cross location areas and need to tell the network about it. At the same time, when network-initiated traffic comes in for the user, and the network needs to page the user, the network needs to page, typically, an entire location area. I'm using the legacy network architecture, where let's say one location area, let's sort of draw it in contrast here actually. Let's say this is as big as all these 9 tracking areas, one location area. You get to page the whole location area, however large or small you want it to make it. Yeah, it's really serving the purpose here. If you need to page the user or reach the user at all from the network towards the user, you receive an incoming call, you have to page the user, and so there's this trade-off between location updates and paging. The smaller the location area is, the more location area updates. The larger the location area is, the more cell sites you have to reach when you're sending a page. That's the idea. Tracking area lists allow you to make this a little bit smarter. To illustrate, let's say you have a user who lives in tracking area 1 and works and does all the shopping in tracking area 3. He might be moving along like this all the time. You might have, let's say, user 2 who is constantly traveling across 1, 2, and 4. You might have, let's say, user 3 who never leaves tracking area 5. So with tracking area lists, you can have the enemy dynamically update this list of used and previously used tracking areas of a specific user device. So you could say, well, device, this red UE, I'll give them a tracking area list of 1 and 3. And I'll give this green user a tracking area list of 1, 2, and 4. I'll give this blue user a tracking area list of 5. So what this does is I'm telling the user, you don't have to update me if you cross 1 to 3. And the green user, you don't have to update me if you cross 1, 2, or 4. Blue user, you don't have to update me unless you cross 5 because you never leave 5. At the same time, if I need to page you, I'm going to page 1 and 3. That's what I would say is the enemy towards the red user. The enemy will page 1, 2, and 4 if you are the green user. And to reach the blue user, I need only to page tracking area 5. Because you can have this concept of a tracking area list, where the last known or the last 3, let's say, tracking areas the user was in can be issued to the UE for his tracking area update procedure. This allows you to have this user-specific, more granular, more intelligent, more flexible tracking area update mechanism, where I only page the tracking areas that this specific UE is frequenting, and that way I can remove the burden of the user to constantly send me tracking area updates if he just happens to, let's say, live right between these, if he lives right at the border between 6 and 3, rather than requiring that device to constantly update as he moves between the two, I can ease the burden both on the UE for battery life and on the network for needing to receive all this extra signaling by just giving it a list of 3 and 6. So that's all I really wanted to cover for this video. I realize this is a fair amount of theory to cover in one video. Mobility management itself is one of the more important concepts, especially when you start talking about evolved packet system as it can relate to the other networks. I didn't want to get too much into the interworking theory, but if you're using something like circuit switch fallback, you can have the evolved the MME, the evolved packet core, actually updating the circuit switch core as to what his circuit switch location is. Those kinds of procedures get into play. It can get more complicated than this. I wanted to stop here though, just because I feel like this video has covered enough theory for one video. I might do CS fallback as its own video separately, and a couple others, SRVCC and more. But anyway, I'm going to stop here. I hope you have at least a basic understanding from this on the evolved packet systems mobility management concept. Thank you very much for watching.